stellar career in broadcasting and science outreach. Interesting vignette. He and I are both alumni of the demonstrator program at the Ontario Science Centre. Bob joined the Science Centre in 1972, just as I was about to graduate and move out of the student demonstrator program there. And over the years, we've sort of crisscrossed paths back and forth, primarily in astronomy, but in general science as well. And of course, we know that over the years, he's gone on to work on a number of really important science programs in the media, particularly on radio, and he's now been the host of CBC's Quirks and Quarks for the longest of any of the hosts in the history of that program. So congratulations on that, Bob. And his work in education has been recognized in a number of ways, particularly here in Canada through the Michael Smith Award for Science Promotion in 2001 from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, the Sanford Fleming Medal in 2002 from the Royal Canadian Institute for the Advancement of Science, and in 2005 he got the MacDonald Medal for Public Awareness of Science from the Royal Society of Canada. So he's one of the few people who's actually gone and won the Triple Crown of recognitions for science communication in the country. So it's great to be able to call on him today to talk to us. And by the way, this is also a first in that our lecture this morning is being broadcast live to Science Timmins by way of Google Hangouts on AIR. So it's a first for STAO to have a satellite or a remote connection over the internet. And we've got 17 teachers, your colleagues, who are clustered around a couple of monitors in Timmins listening to us as we go. So good morning, folks in Timmins, and we hope you'll enjoy the show. So Bob?
Thank you, Rob. Good morning, everyone. I was worried earlier when this was just a very small room and there was no one in it. So thank you all for showing up. And hello to everybody in Timmins. Glad that you can join us. I was in Timmins recently, and I found out an interesting thing that's happening up there, or did happen up there in the past. The famous detective Sherlock Holmes actually visited Timmins. And it's well known, but Sherlock and Watson were avid campers. And they were just outside of Timmins, and they were camping, and it was a beautiful central Ontario night. There was no moon, the stars were out, and Sherlock woke up in the middle of the night and looked up, and it was just glorious. The Milky Way and everything was there. And he woke up Watson in the middle of the night, and he said, "Watson, look up and tell me what you see." Watson was very densely, but he always tries to impress Sherlock as best he can. So he looks up and he says, "Well, sir, I see stars. I see thousands of stars. Astronomically, that tells me that the universe is vast and we're but a small part of it. Says, theologically, it tells me that if there's a God, he or she is a great designer. Climatologically, it tells me that tomorrow will probably be a clear day. And chronologically, it tells me that the hour is indeed late, sir." "Why, what do you see?" Sherlock says, "Why, it's elementary, my dear Watson. Someone has stolen our tent." Okay, that's perspective. It's all how you look at things, isn't it? It's all how you look at things. And that's why I find science so amazing. That science looks at the same world that everybody else looks at, but looks at it in exquisite detail. And with our science, we can take anything and we can look down into the very small, and we can take a leap and look at cells, or we can look at all the creatures that live there, or we can look at the carbon atoms that it's made of, or we can look at the quarks that the atoms are made of, Or we can go out into space and we can look out at the edge of the universe and go beyond the stars. We can see the energy that's in the dark between the stars that actually makes up more of the universe than the stars themselves. We can go back in time and we can look at big ugly creatures that stomped around on this land long before humans even existed. We can try to go into the future. It's amazing. And yet we're still looking at the same world that everybody else looks at. But to see it in that incredible detail, and to see patterns, to see how we fit into it, to see how systems are on top of systems. And that's why science to me is so fascinating. And that's why your work is so important. To tell people that, tell young people that, hey, there's more to the world than what you're seeing on your device, or what you're seeing on television, or even what you see outside. There's more to it than that. And it's really important to get them away from their devices, get them away from their overprotective parents, take them out into a forest, put your hand on the back of their head and shove your face in the dirt, you know. Get dirty. Eat that. You gotta do it. You gotta shove their face in a river, you know. Here, look at some fish. Turn over some rocks, see what's crawling around underneath. We gotta do that because the kids are so isolated now. Everything's coming through glass. They're looking at it through the glass of their devices or out the glass window of a car. They're nature deprived. Well, I want to talk to you today about 3 remarkable Canadians, and it's a little bit of history that I realized had not been written. We've had 7 Canadian astronauts, but only 3 of them took going into space one level higher. They put on spacesuits and they went outside. And so I've chronicled this in this book, and it's in their words. So I sat down with all 3 of them, and you're going to meet them in a minute, and really had some really nice long chats with them. I didn't do this through Quirks and Quarks or through the CBC. I actually sat down and had a beer and had dinner and really got into it. You may astronomers or what, well, even anybody will tell you after a few beers. But it's a nice full-color book, and so it's in their words and what it was like to do that. But just before I get on to that, I want to tell you about an interesting experience I had last summer. I drove to Pluto. And this was the end of a long, long journey for me that began when I was 8 years old. People often ask me, when did you get interested in science? And I had trouble answering that for a while, because I thought, well, I've always been interested in science. I'm just not good at doing it. That's why I'm a journalist. I don't have to do it, I just get to talk about it. It's great. But it all comes down to a book that my mother brought home one day after shopping. And it was called The Planets. I still have it. It's just a golden book of Library of Knowledge. And this book had drawings of what the planets were like, because when I was 8 years old, the space program hadn't even begun yet. Well, the first satellite had been put up, Sputnik. That was it. And we were thinking about going to the planets, but we hadn't been there. So it only had drawings of what those planets might be like. And one of the drawings in the book that really caught my attention was this one, a picture of, or a drawing of Jupiter. And I don't know if you can read it, but it said, seen from Amalthea, its closest moon, Jupiter would cover 1/4 of your sky. Jupiter would cover 1/4 of your sky. Now, I was old enough to know fractions. And 1/4, that's a lot. You know, that's like this big. It would be really big. And I did an experiment, my first experiment. The next time I saw the moon, I measured it. Have you ever done that? You ever measured the moon? I know the moon looks this big sometimes, especially when it's low on the horizon, harvest moon and all that. Well, if you go outside and hold your arm straight out and measure the moon, it is, anybody have any idea how big it is? It's the size of an aspirin. Really, try, it's that big to our eye. So if the moon is that big and Jupiter is this big, I went, holy smokes, there's a place. There is a place out there in space where I would see that. And then I started reading about Jupiter and found out that it's a giant planet. You could put 1,000 Earths inside it. The big red spot, you could drop the Earth in that 3 times. And it's all storms and clouds. And it struck me as a kid, as an 8-year-old kid, that the Earth is only one of a whole family of planets, and they're all really, really different. I knew that as an 8-year-old kid. Well, it's been my exquisite pleasure to be alive and be a journalist during the time when we actually went to those planets with robots. We actually went out there. And as Ralph said, he and I came from the Ontario Science Centre. I notice you're dyeing your hair gray now like I do. It's very expensive. This is what I look like in Ralph's day. Come on, you've all got pictures like this somewhere. People actually trusted their kids to this fellow. But while I was working at the Science Center, NASA started sending robots out to the planets. They were going to Mars and Jupiter, Saturn, and all this. And I wanted to see that. I wanted to be there. They control the robots, most of them from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. And so I asked my boss, I said, can you send me to California? They're going to land on Mars. And he said, no. So I bought myself a ticket to California, and I wrote a letter to NASA using Science Center stationery. I said, dear NASA, this is Bob MacDonald. He's covering the Viking mission to Mars. Please give him a press pass. That's all I had. And I scribbled a name on the bottom. And I went there with this piece of paper, and I said, hi, I'm from Canada. I'm here to cover the Viking mission. They said, okay. And they gave me a press badge. Hey, I'm in. We landed on Mars. It was great. And I came back. When I came back here, I had all these pictures and stories, and the media called up and said, hey, can somebody talk about Mars? I said, yeah, I can do that. So I went down. I was on the news that night, and they said, hey, you're pretty good on camera. Do you want to come back and be a science guy? Sure. And then I was on Canada AM the next morning, and they said, wow, you're really good on camera. Do you want to come back and be a science guy? I said, sure. That's the story of my life, by the way. I'm not officially trained to do anything that I do, but I really like it, and I'm really enthusiastic about it, and they seem to like that. So that got me there. So Viking was the first in 1976 on Mars, but then there was a big one coming up called Voyager that was going to go to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, a grand tour of the solar system. I wanted to see that. That was 1977. They were launching it. So I got on my motorcycle, and I drove from Toronto down to Cape Canaveral to watch the launch of Voyager. And it took off and went off, and these unmanned robots, they're quite different from the space shuttles. Because when people are in them, when you got meat inside, they got to take off fairly slowly because you don't want to crush the meat. So they can only accelerate to 3 times your own weight, 3 Gs. But the robots, they can take 12 or more Gs. So when they take off, it's like, holy cow, look at that thing go. So we only saw it for a matter of seconds, and by 6 o'clock that night, it was already beyond the moon. This thing was out of here. It was on its way. So then I had to wait 2 years. 2 years to get to Jupiter. And then it did. And it got to Jupiter, and we saw that Jupiter was this riot of color, and we saw the storms and the great red spot and all of that. But what I was really waiting to see, was my little moon, and they only got one shot of it. And it was from a great distance, so the picture is grainy, but there's Amalthea. There's that moon that I wanted to see. And the grainy stuff that's in the background, that's Jupiter itself. It's up against the body of Jupiter on a telephoto lens. So I actually almost got to go there as far as we can, because these robots are artificial senses that we send out like dogs and say, go sniff around and see what you find. So I went back again for Saturn, went back again for Uranus, went back again for Neptune. It took 12 years from the time I saw it launch to the time we got to Neptune. I was going gray already. The scientists were going bald. Some had died just to get to Neptune. That's how long it took. It's amazing how big our solar system is and how slow our robots are. But the one thing that Voyager did not do was go to Pluto. Because back in the 70s, the 4 big planets were on the same side of the sun. It was a grand conjunction, so we could do this quadruple bank shot. That was the only opportunity. Pluto was not in the right position to do it. So it was only this summer. And again, it was a 9-year journey to get there, but this summer, we sent the spacecraft New Horizons to get to Pluto. Well, I wanted to be there. I now live in British Columbia, just north of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Pluto was controlled from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Well, I still drive motorcycles. So I got a special motorcycle for this trip, and the only reason I got it is because it's called a Voyager. So I took Voyager to Pluto. And what a mission it was. We knew nothing about Pluto. And that's what's so great about going somewhere for the first time. That's why I went to these missions. We were going there for the first time and seeing things that human eyes had never seen before. And what we saw at Pluto was just this wonderful world with its moons going around it, a world made of ice, a world that comes in different colors, a world with different kinds of ice on it, a big heart down at the bottom that's basically a giant glacier. And then after it passed by, we saw this, that the glacier is not made of water ice like the kind we have here. Pluto's body is. Its body is made of water ice. That's the ground. But out there where it's hundreds of degrees below zero, the ice is as hard as rock or harder. On top of that is frozen air, nitrogen ice, which apparently when they make it in laboratories, if you could hold it in your hand, it would burn because it's so cold, but it would actually drip through your fingers. It moves. It's gooey. It doesn't form crystals like ours does. It's a gooey ice. And so that it flows, it moves around. And they have seen action on the surface of Pluto. It's alive. It's got energy inside. This ice is moving. Where that energy is coming from, they have no idea because Pluto's pretty small. And then we saw mountains. Here's action. You can see the nitrogen ice flowing and moving around, just like our glaciers fall off our mountains and flow down. But it's nitrogen ice on this incredible world. And then when we went by it, we saw that Pluto has an atmosphere, and it has layers to that atmosphere, and it has mountains. The mountains are as tall as our Rockies, 13,000 feet high, made of ice. Ice mountains as high as our Rockies. So keep watching. There's still a lot more to come. The spacecraft is broadcasting back at a very slow bit rate because it's very far away and its antenna is small. And so far, it's only given us about 20% of the data that it has recorded. So there's still a lot more to come about Pluto, so keep your eye on it. But it was really neat to just be there and finally complete my journey of the solar system from the book that my mother gave me to Pluto. And look, I've gotten old in the process. So, you know, we're not quite to warp drive yet. We really need warp drive. Well, yeah, here we are flying over Pluto. Look at that. That's incredible. I'm still astounded when humanity didn't know this before July. We didn't know this before July. These are brand new pictures. What an amazing time to be alive. Amazing time to be alive. So, the astronauts, to get on to my main topic, the three of them, one of them I know you know. Now, talk about perspectives. This is Chris Hadfield, best known as the commander of the International Space Station, most recently, but that was his third time in space. It was on his second time in space that he donned a spacesuit and went outside and became Canada's first spacewalker. And here he is outside, and if you look carefully at that Canadian flag on his shoulder, you'll notice that it's curled up at the edges. That's because at that time the spacesuits had American flags on the shoulders, and they didn't sew a Canadian one on there for Chris. So he brought the flag up with him, and before he went outside, he used some medical tape and stuck it on his shoulder. I'm Canadian, don't forget that. And this picture was taken after he was out there. He's actually looking back into the window of the space shuttle. So it's sort of like, you know, you put a little kid in a snowsuit and you put them outside, and they come around, they knock on the window and say, hi! That's what he's doing here. So Chris Hadfield was the first, and he built our Canadarm2 on the International Space Station. The second person to do it was Steve McLean. Steve is a laser physicist. He was a gymnast. He does tumbling and gymnastics. And when he came back, he became the head of the Canadian Space Agency for a while. And now he's working at the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, working on quantum computers. All of our astronauts are incredible overachievers, every one of them. But Steve went outside, and see if you can see him in this picture. If you look really closely, I can't use my laser pointer very well here, but he's just at the bottom end. You can see his feet sticking out the bottom end of that big truss that's almost in the center. His feet are kind of sticking there. Let's see if I can point to him. There he is right there. And there he is right there. Just barely see his feet sticking out. The space station is huge. 450 tons, bigger than a football field, including the end zones. It's huge. And what they were doing was building it, helping to construct it. In fact, I heard an interesting story just in the ready room before coming here. Somebody said they were at an event with Julie Payette, and someone saw her and said, didn't know who she was, and said, "What do you do?" She said, "I work in construction." So he just kind of went away. But that's what they were doing. And then the third one to go into space is Dave Williams. Dave Williams is a medical doctor, and he became the first non-American to be the chief medical officer for NASA. So he had a corner office at NASA headquarters, a Canadian, the chief medical officer for NASA. He's now the CEO of a hospital in Newmarket. But he holds the record for Canadian spacewalking. He did 3 spacewalks. He was outside for more than 3 hours, 3.5 hours outside. And here he is handling a gigantic gyroscope that would be impossible to pick up on the ground. But in space, you can move very large objects reasonably easily. They're weightless, but they still have mass. So you got to deal with action, reaction, and momentum and all of that, but they're weightless. And he's also standing on the end of Canadarm2. We've had 2 types of Canadarms. The first one was like your arm. It was used only on the space shuttles. It had a shoulder that was permanently attached to the shuttle, an elbow, a wrist, and a hand that could grip things. And it could move around like this. And the way you fly it is like a helicopter. You only have to think about the end. You just fly the end of it around, and the computers take care of all the joints. Just make sure it gets to where you want. And it's accurate to within millimeters. Incredible. Canadarm2 is 2 arms. So there's a hand on either end. It's twice as big, and it's really strong. In fact, it was designed to grab a space shuttle and pull it in for a docking. They never did that, but it's strong enough to do that. So what it can do, it uses one hand to hold on to the station, and the other hand to wave around or put an astronaut on the end and use it like a cherry picker. But it can also grab on with both hands, then let this one go and walk. It can walk its way around the space station. They call it ambulate. It can actually do that. I was at the handover ceremony where it was built here in Toronto, and they were sending it down to NASA, and they had it all set up. And I was there, and I asked the engineers, I said, "How do you know it's not going to let go of both hands at the same time?" He said, "Not going to happen. That's it, just not going to happen." Okay. It also has a little railway I can drive around on as well. So it's quite mobile, and it's helped to build the International Space Station. So these are the 3 Canadian astronauts. Now also in the book, besides their stories of adventures, I've also included the stories of this journalist who has had the privilege, as a journalist, to play with some of the same toys that the astronauts use to train for space. That's the great advantage of being a journalist. You see something that you want to do, and you say, "Can I do a story on that?" And they say, "Sure." So I haven't been to space yet. Still working on that. Although Julie Payette, when she went up the last time, she said, "Would you like me to bring something up that I can carry in space?" So I gave her a postcard, a Quirks and Quarks postcard with my face on it. And I said, "Sure, take this up and sign it when you're in space." Well, she did more than that. When she brought it back, she framed it, and it's at the top. But at the bottom is another picture of my postcard floating in front of the window of the space station with the Earth outside. So my face has been to space. I'm getting up there one piece at a time. It's like the old joke of the American, the British pilot who got shot down over Germany during the war, and he wakes up in a German hospital, and the doctor says, "Well, Colonel, we got some good news and some bad news. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, we had to cut off your arm." And he said, "Oh, that's really too bad." He said, "Well, could you do me a favor? I don't want my arm to end up in enemy territory. On your next bombing run over England, could you include my arm so that at least it's in my homeland?" Well, okay, I guess it's kind of odd, but yeah, we can do that. Then they have to say, "We have to take off your other arm." "Oh, well, can you send it?" So they do. And they're working through his limbs. They get down to his last limb. And when he asked, "Can you drop it over England?" they said, "No, we can't do that." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Colonel, we're on to you." You're trying to escape. Where was I? Anyway, so I got to do this zero-G flight. And this is not the one that the astronauts use. This is a commercial one. You can buy tickets on it. It's called zero-G. Google it. It's not cheap. But it's a half-day experience. The one I did flies out of Florida, out of Fort Lauderdale. And it's a big airplane. It's an airliner. Well, actually, it's a cargo plane, but it's the size of an airliner. And they fly cargo during the week. But on the weekends, they take people up to do these zero-G flights. There's only 24 seats. They're all at the back. So it's a big empty tube. And there are no windows, which is good. You don't want to see what this airplane's doing. So you get in your seat. It's usual takeoff. They give you the usual braking. Do you know how to use a seatbelt? Moron. Like we've never seen seatbelts before, right? Do you put the tab into the slot, or do you put the slot over the tab? Which is it? I've never seen one of these. Anyway, you take off. You have no idea what the plane's doing. You just hear the engines get loud. You get pushed into your seat. You can't tell if it's going up, down, or anything. You're just in this big tube. They fly out over the ocean, where they have a chunk of air where they're allowed to do these maneuvers. And you get out of your seat and you lie on the floor. You lie on your back. They don't want you to move. They don't want you to move your head. You lie on your back. They put the airplane into a climb, 45 degrees up. That's a lot. That's halfway to straight up. When you take off on a regular jet like Air Canada or WestJet, you know that moment of leaving the ground, you go, whoa, that's really cool. That's 12 degrees. But again, you have no idea. You're just in the plane. And then they put it through a parabolic arc, which is a parabola. I don't want to use mine. Okay, here's a parabola. Okay. The curve that anything in the air follows is a parabola, right? So they go through this parabolic arc, and they have to actually fly it. It's not a stall. And for 30 seconds, you're weightless. So I want to show you a little bit of this that we did. This was for a children's series I did for TV Ontario called Heads Up. It's all about space. And not only was I the writer of it, but I was the host, so I got to write myself into Bob goes on a zero-G flight. So what you're going to see, the first one is they didn't go to zero. They just flew a partial parabola and just lowered our weight a bit. They brought it down to 1/3, which is the gravity of Mars. So we get to see what it's like to walk like a Martian. And the second one went to 1/6, which is the gravity of the moon. And then we go to zero. By the way, after the plane has gone through the arc, it's now pointing 45 degrees down, which is like pointing straight at the ground. Pilots don't like to do that for very long. They don't like to point big airplanes straight at the ground. So they have to pull it up, so they yell at you. They say, feet down, because your feet could be in any position. So you got to get your feet under you. They pull the plane up, you float back down to the floor, lie on your back again, and as they pull it up, you feel twice your weight. So you go from 0 to 2 times your weight, then back to 0 again. And we did this 15 times. And nobody puked. So let me see if our technology will work here. And see what happens.
The zero-G airplane does the same thing in the air, but it makes much bigger hills and valleys. When an airplane is flying along a straight line, everyone feels the same force of gravity that they do standing on the ground. That's 1G for gravity. But if the plane flies in a hump pattern, it's like going over the top of the hill. The people inside will feel lighter. And if they feel 1/3 of their weight, that's the gravity of Mars. If the plane flies over a steeper hump, the people will feel lighter still. At 1/6 of our weight, we feel like we're walking on the moon. And if the plane airplane flies a really steep path through the air, we'll feel no weight at all, just like the astronauts in space.
That was pretty amazing. Hard to get to the bottom. I'm starting to feel really heavy. Getting heavier. I feel twice my weight now. Okay. Sure. I'm heavy weightless, just like an astronaut. I'm not going to even change.
Of course, the pilot is in the plane too, so he feels the same thing.
Yeah, didn't matter what I did, I ended up on my head. But it was great. It was great. I now know why astronauts move in slow motion. You know, you see them in space, they're always moving. You have to. You have to. Because when you are weightless, if you touch anything at all, you just go in the opposite direction, and you cannot stop until you hit the opposite wall or another person. In that case, I kept getting kicked in the head by feet. I mean, feet everywhere. But it's really amazing. You have to slow down. You got to plan where you want to go and say, okay, I'm going to go up there, and then push yourself off and sort of fly like Superman to get to where you want to go. Because otherwise, you're just bouncing all over the walls. That's why they move in slow motion. And you don't get sick, or at least we didn't get sick on that, partially because we took some medication for it, but also you can't see outside, so there's no conflict between what your eyes are seeing and what your body's feeling. It's just like somebody turned gravity off, and it's your entire body that's coming out. It's your entire body. It's not like being strapped into a car and you go over a hump or a roller coaster and you're strapped down. Then yeah, it's your stomach coming up through your mouth. But that doesn't happen because it's your whole body. So it was really quite remarkable to experience a little bit, just a little taste of what weightlessness is all about. I've also been in machines. Oh, sorry. This minute, let me get back to where we were there. Yep. So I've also been in machines that try to disorient you on purpose. This is at the Defense Lab in Downsview, where they train pilots for motion sickness and to experience G-forces. This is just a very simple flight simulator. All I had to do was fly the thing straight and level. Then they closed the door on the capsule that I was in and spun it around, and I couldn't see out. But it was moving at a constant rate. So at the beginning, I could feel it turning, but then once my semicircular canals caught up to me, it was fine. I was just sitting in this smooth running thing, and okay, what's the big deal here? Then they said, tilt your head to the side. And I did this. And as soon as I did that, I got this powerful sense that I was going up, but I wasn't. So I'm trying to straighten. Then they said, put your head to the other side. I went like this, and it felt like I was going down, even though I wasn't. Because our fluids that we have in our ears, they're in little tubes, and they're arranged on the 3 axes of motion, up and down. This way, when you're saying no, and when you're saying, I don't know. That. So when you switch from one to the other, you get very disoriented. And in space, they're all getting cues, and it's all confusing. You have to actually turn that off. Astronauts forget about that. They can't use the motion of their heads. They have to just use their eyes, which makes it very difficult when they do come back down to the ground. So I've been spun up in those. I've been in a centrifuge that takes you up to 3.5 times your weight, more than what we did on the zero-G airplane. And again, 3Gs, that's what you get during launch. But you have to be able to raise your arms up and deal with buttons and things, so there's more weight to it. Astronauts have to be fit. They're like Olympic athletes. They train for weights, for endurance. They have to be very, very strong to do what they do. It looks like it's Peter Pan, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So spacewalking goes back, way back to the Russians. They were the first to do it. Alexei Leonov was the first to go outside in 1965, and he almost died doing it. He almost died. They had no idea what it was going to be like because no one had ever been out in a total vacuum. before. You cannot create a total vacuum on the ground that's equal to space. So when he went out, he was on an umbilical cord, and he went out and he said, I see the whole Earth passing below me. It was wonderful. He was out there for a few minutes, but then he noticed that his fingers were coming out of his gloves and his feet were coming out of his boots because the spacesuit was inflating. There was air inside keeping him alive, but no air on the outside. The suit was getting bigger. So they thought, okay, well, you better come in. He was only out for 10 minutes. He started to come back in. He went to the hatch. He pulled himself in, and he didn't fit. His suit was bigger than the hatchway. He couldn't get in. And he was struggling, and he was working at it, trying to get through. And his temperature went up. His heart rate went up. The doctors on the ground were getting worried about him. He was getting worried about him. You can't come back from space with the door open. He couldn't get in. So the only way he could get himself in was to let air out of his suit. He had to let his own oxygen out into space, threatening hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen to the brain, and the risk of his blood boiling, getting the bends like divers do. So he had to do that to soften his suit, and he finally struggled in. It took him another 10 minutes to get in, but he did. And the Russians didn't do another spacewalk for years after that. They thought it was just too crazy and dangerous. So the first spacewalk was almost the first fatality in space. The Americans did it right after that with a guy named Ed White. Fortunately, his spacecraft had a really big door, so we didn't have that problem. And he went out and had a great time floating around out there. So that was the beginning of spacewalking. And then the only actual people who really walked in space were those who went to the moon, the 12 people who went to the moon. They actually stood on a surface and walked around and got their boots dirty. And so they were real spacewalkers. And by the way, they were the only ones to see the whole Earth. Our astronauts who go up today on the International Space Station, they're only 400 kilometers up, which isn't very far. That's like here to Ottawa. So they can see the curve of the Earth, but they can't see the whole planet. They're too close. It was only those who went to the moon that got to see the whole Earth. We can't do that today, we're coming up to the 50th anniversary. 2019 is going to be the 50th anniversary of landing on the moon, and we can't go there? What happened? What the heck happened? Anyway, onward. Where they train to do this is my wife Sharon and I with Chris at the world's largest swimming pool, which is where they do most of the weightless training. And in this pool, they have a giant full-size mock-up of the International Space Station. They used to have the shuttle down there. And they put on the same spacesuits, same kind of spacesuits they're going to wear in space. And they come in 3 pieces. So first they have to put on the pants. They have to lie on the floor to do that. Now you'll notice that Chris is wearing a white undergarment, and that garment has woven into the fabric little plastic tubes that carry water. And that's his air conditioning. Because in space, there's no air to spread the heat around, like we have here on the ground. On a sunny day, you'll feel the heat of the sun, but your other side is still warm because the air is spreading it. In space, that doesn't happen. So your sunny side can be 150 degrees above zero. Your shady side can be 150 below. So there's a huge difference in space. Plus, they're going around the world every hour and a half. So they're going from daylight to darkness every 90 minutes. And so they have to adjust their temperature. So they're always doing it, and that's done by water wrapped around their bodies. So once they get the pants on, he's got to be helped up, and he stomps himself over to the upper body, which is a hard shell that's made of Kevlar. And he has to come up underneath it and then emerge like a turtle, putting its head out through the top and his arms out through the holes. And then they attach the arms, and they put the helmet, and they attach the bottom to the top, and he's built. That's what they call it. You're built. Now, it looks like he's standing, but he's actually not. He's being held up by a rig, because you cannot stand in a spacesuit on the ground. The spacesuit weighs more than 100 kilos, weighs more than you do. So they have to be held up, and there's another fellow behind him, if you can see there. They're facing back to back, and they're on a crane. So the crane picks them up and drops them into the water. And then once they're down, there's Steve McLean going down, bye. And then once they're underwater, they're neutrally buoyant so that they don't float, they don't sink. Divers put weights on them. And that's the closest to weightlessness we can get on the Earth. And then they practice the tools that they're going to use. They go through every step again and again and again. They do this hundreds of times to practice with the tools that they're going to use. Where do I put my feet? Where do I hang on? Because again, in space, if you're weightless, and they say, okay, we want you to go over there and undo that big bolt. Here's the wrench. Well, you can't just put the wrench on the bolt and honk on it, because the bolt will stay there, and you will be the one doing the spinning, right? So they have to figure out, are they going to put their feet here? Are they going to attach their feet like the person is in the dive? How are they going to do it? They have to practice it over and over and over again. Then finally, they're ready to go out into space. They also have a full-size mock-up in Houston that is the space station spread out on the floor, and it's huge. And you can go through this, and they practice simulations. Here I am with Dave Williams inside one of the modules, and the Russian module is behind us. The American modules are in front of us. There's a European module, a Japanese module. It's truly international. 12 countries involved in the space station. Truly, truly international. And Canada is a big player. When they want to go outside, they have to go into an airlock, and the suits are so big and the airlock's so small, they have to face in opposite directions. And then they open the door outside and they step out. And you can either come out head first or feet first, but the airlock points down. So you're 400 kilometers above the Earth with nothing under you. And you got to come out, and there could be a feeling of falling, but you're not. So you have to accept the fact that you're not going to fall. I asked each one of them, I said, what was that moment like when you opened the hatch and emerged? I was expecting to say, oh, it was like being born again, coming out of the womb. I saw the entire universe. You know what they all said, all three of them? They said, I don't want to mess up. I don't want to make a mistake. I got to reach to the left and grab a handrail. I have to do a forward flip. I have to attach my tether. I got to go over here. I got to do. They practiced so much in their head every step of what they were going to do. And Steve McLean said, don't look at the Earth. Don't look at the Earth. Because the Earth is so powerfully beautiful when you're outside. All you've got is your bubble helmet. You're not looking through a window. You got your bubble helmet. You can look in any direction. And the Earth is so beautiful, they want to stop and just go, and they stop working. So it's only after they've been working for a while and they have a little break that they can turn around and have a look at what they're seeing. And they were all pretty amazed by that. And the Earth can be above you, it can be behind you, it can be beside you, and it's changing all the time. It only takes them 20 minutes to cross Canada. I wish I could do that with Air Canada. Really bumpy flight coming here last night, boy. Anyway, so it's quite a profound experience. And there's their home. As I say, the larger than a football field with those big solar panels. And I don't know if you can see, our Canadarm is right in the center there, standing up, Canadarm 2. So that's our home in space in the moment. They, while they're outside, they get these incredible views, both during the day and at night. This is Quebec. And that circle in the center is Manicouagan Crater, a very famous crater. And the St. Lawrence is to the bottom of the picture. And north is almost to the top, but not quite. And you can see the northern lights up there. Steve McLean lived in Montreal. And while he was outside, when they went over Montreal, he wanted to make sure that he had the time to look down and see it. So he said he was passing over Quebec like this, and there was all of Quebec. But then all he did was just turn his body this way and look to his right. And as he did that, he could see all of Gaspé, Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, and on the horizon, Newfoundland. He could see it all in one view, just by turning his head. And then, and they all did this as well, he continued to look up and looked out into the black. They were saying when you turn your back on the Earth and turn your back on the space station and turn out your lights, that black in space is so much blacker than what we see here on the ground because there's nothing, there's no air between you and the rest of the universe. The most velvety black they'd ever seen. And all of them thought about how far that goes. How far that goes. And there they are, out there, in it, wearing nothing but a suit. It's a profound, profound experience, and privilege to be up there. Of course, Dave Williams said, it's only a suit. It's only a suit. There are micrometeoroids out here. Things can go through you. Humbling. And of course, they get to see the northern lights and the southern lights going over Australia. Chris said the aurora are like the Earth has cracks in it and somebody's shining green laser beams up. Because they're looking down on the northern lights, so they see them coming up through the Earth. Totally spectacular views. In the future, spacesuits are going to change. They're going to become more flexible and lighter. This one's called the Buzz Lightyear suit. It's interesting because it has a door in the back. The idea of this suit is to keep it outside. It stays on the outside of your habitat or your rover, because the one thing they found when they went to the moon is that it's really dirty there, and the dust got in everything. And when they came back into their lunar lander, everything got coated in this stuff, and they were worried about it getting in the equipment. Well, Mars is also a dusty place. So these suits, they stay on the outside, so there's a hatch in the back, and you open the door from inside your habitat, just crawl into your suit, close the door, and then step away. So that's the idea for future suits, is to do that. And here's another prototype of a suit. This woman who was at MIT designed a skin-tight suit. She's now the deputy administrator of NASA. So you might see this suit come along. Her idea is, instead of building a balloon around you and using air to keep the pressure on you so that your blood won't boil, use the suit itself. Just use the pressure of the suit. Make it elastic. Make it squeezing you so it'll keep you, and that way it's more flexible. I really like that idea. We need flexibility, especially if we go to Mars. Because we got to do more than just go there and collect rocks. We got to start having some fun. There's good skiing on Mars. Both polar caps are covered in ice, and it's dry ice. It's frozen carbon dioxide. So if you get covered in it, you won't get wet. It's dry ice. And under that 1/3 gravity, can you imagine coming down a hill? You hit a bump, you're, a lot of time in the air. So we need some flexibility. So we're gonna start seeing this in the future. So yeah, I want to really start having some fun, low gravity sports. Imagine Olympics on the moon, or on Phobos, one of the moons of Mars. Mars has 2 moons. We've only got 1, but there's a really, really tiny. Phobos would fit within the boundaries of Toronto easily, and it's so small that you would weigh a couple of grams, maybe. You'd be so light that every time you took a step, you'd just float up, and it would take you quite a while to come back down again. In fact, you'd be Superman or Supergirl. You know the original story of Superman? He couldn't actually fly. He could leap over tall buildings at a single bound. He could leap because his planet Krypton was more massive than the Earth. Krypton was a massive planet with a lot of gravity. So his body was built for a high gravity environment. When he came to the Earth, it was really light for him, so he could jump really high. Well, you're adapted to Earth gravity. If you went to Phobos, you would find it so easy to jump. You could run into orbit. You could play baseball with yourself. Yeah, you pick a ball, just throw it at the horizon. It wouldn't take too much. It would take about 20 minutes for the ball to go into orbit around the moon. And there's no air, so it wouldn't stop. So you go have a coffee. You come back 20 minutes later with a bat. Face the other direction. Wait for the ball. Yeah! If you hit it, home run. You'll never see it again. If you miss, no problem. The ball will continue in orbit. So you go have another coffee or lunch or something. Come back 20 minutes later as the catcher. Long game, but fun to do. So yeah, we got to start having fun in space. So our three amazing Canadians, Dave Williams and Steve McLean and Chris Hadfield, the only ones to go outside. Hopefully our future Canadian astronauts will have the opportunity to do that. But their stories told to me are in this book. It's available outside, and I'll also be outside if you'd like me to sign them. That's why I did it. So I hope that you enjoy it. And thanks again for having me here today. And please spread the word. Inspire those kids. Inspire those kids. Your work is so, so important. You're on the front lines of our education. I wish you well. Thank you very much.
I don't think there's any more need to state that Bob hasn't already said that he's showing you the enthusiasm and These are the kind of people that we need to stimulate the young people in our schools everywhere. Seeing the joy and all the work that he does in the science and the applications and so forth, I think it's truly a pleasure to have Bob with us at our conference. He's done this a number of times, and in recognition of this, we have a little certificate of appreciation for the number of times that Bob has come to Stale. We see Bob as a friend of Stale. And he was not a teacher, but he certainly is a teacher at heart and has an ability to do the things that you can see in getting us all to be a little bit happier about what we do and enthused by the kinds of enthusiasm that he demonstrates. Bob, here's a little something.
Thanks, Don.
He really needs another piece of paper.
Thank you very much. Did anybody have any questions? We have a couple minutes. Want to ask a question, please? Yes, sir.
I have a question. Okay, I just recently saw the movie Gravity.
You just saw the movie Gravity,
Saw
yeah.
the movie Gravity. How realistic is what they showed to being in outer space?
Well, visually it was great.
Yeah.
They got the Earth right, they got the shuttle right, they got the space station right, but all the motions that they were going through out there, totally wrong. George Clooney was doing loops around the thing. That's not how that manned maneuvering unit works. You work in vectors. You go in straight lines like this, and it's really slow because of the mass. So that was all wrong. And when they were flying through, here, grab this as we go by, and they'd grab onto something and flip over to stop themselves, you'd rip your arms off because of the mass of the suit. The suit is so massive. There's no way. You'd have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to hang on like that. So I don't think Sandra Bullock had the... And the other thing that really bothered me, when she finally got out of her spacesuit, that scene of her, where was her space diaper? Otherwise, it was a great film. I love it. I mean, great action. One of the scientists who was asked that, he said, sometimes you just have to sit back and enjoy the popcorn. Same thing with
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Ray.
One question for you. The three astronauts, the Canadians that you spoke with after a couple of beers and got into their head, so to speak, did any of the three of them say to you or give you insight that they may have like a little pre-walk ritual, like a good luck charm ritual that they may do, or were they very technical in what they did and didn't do like a scratch their head a certain way thing? Was there something kind of cool about that?
You mean before going outside?
Before just when they're in the chamber, hatch
Yes.
ready to go, yeah.
Yes, Dave Williams talked about that. They get to know their crews very well because they spend a lot of time together, and they had a particular handshake that they did. And he actually talked about when he came back from space and went back into the neutral buoyancy lab to do another simulated spacewalk for possibly another mission. It was a different crew, and they didn't have that. He said he really missed it. He really missed it. So yeah, they do stuff like that. And they also try to dance in their suits. They play music underwater while they're getting set up, and it's really hard to dance. Chris said they look like goofy Michelin men trying to dance underwater. Yeah, they did it. Any other question? Yes, sir.
Hi, Bob. I noticed in the picture of Dave Williams in his suit, he had a Canada patch. So did they make Canada patches then, or was that?
Yes, they did. They actually put Canada patches on them for the Canadians. But they didn't with Chris. He was the only one. They finally recognized that not all astronauts are American. Americans tend to forget that sometimes. Anyone else? Yeah, just one. Well, is this for Timmins?
It's from Timmins, yeah.
Question from Timmins.
So, let's see. Can you leave a message for today's educators in the wake of the STEM trend?
Can I leave a message for today's educators in light of the STEM trend? I mean, like
Science, technology,
yeah,
engineering.
I know what STEM is. Let's Talk Science just put out an interesting report. I don't know if you saw that, showing that young people are interested in STEM, but they're not necessarily going into it. And part of that is because their parents are not encouraging them to do it. So you got to talk to the parents. Talk to the parents. In addition to taking the kids outside and shoving their face in the dirt, take the parents outside and shove their face in the dirt. Yeah, get to the parents too. So talk to them. That would be my message. Okay? Yeah. Okay, I will be around if you want to talk, but once again, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine, and all the teachers from Timmins for tuning in to our Google Hangout. It was great to have you there virtually watching the talk. Did it come through okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Yes.
Excellent. So we'll definitely be trying to do more of this in the future, being able to bring remote communities to the STAO conference via Google Hangouts like this. So thank you for trying it out with us.
So look forward to that. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
the outside signing books, if you want to pick one up.
When I saw Bob MacDonald was here, I thought, oh.
So to the rest of our live audience, thank you for tuning in. My name is Brennan Caverhill, and I'm a volunteer with the Science Teachers Association of Ontario. Thank you for joining us at STAO 2015. We hope to see you back here next year. Bye-bye.